The desert wind howled through Dust Rock like a wounded animal, carrying with it the scent of sage and desperation. It was the kind of night that made honest folk lock their doors and pray for dawn. But in the Harper household, locked doors offered no sanctuary from the devil within. Evelyn Harper pressed her back against the rough wooden wall, her heart hammering so hard she feared it might burst through her ribs. Blood trickled from the corner of her mouth, metallic and warm, a familiar taste that had become as common as the dust that settled on everything in this God-forsaken town. Her husband Jonas stood before her, swaying like a cottonwood in a storm, the whiskey on his breath strong enough to pickle a snake. "Worthless," he slurred, his fist clenching and unclenching at his side. 6 years married, and what do I got to show for it? A daughter. A goddamn daughter who can't carry on the Harper name. Little Margaret, barely 4 years old, cowered behind her mother's skirts, her small fingers twisted in the worn fabric. The child had learned early that silence was survival, that becoming invisible was the only defense against her father's rage. "Jonas, please," Evelyn whispered, though she knew pleading was as useless as praying for rain in August. "Margaret's a blessing. She's smart as a whip, and—" The backhand came swift and brutal, snapping Evelyn's head to the side. Stars danced in her vision, and she tasted fresh blood. "Don't you dare talk back to me, woman. You got one job in this life, and you can't even do that right." Outside, Colt Rawlins had been heading back to his ranch after a long day breaking horses for the Hendersons. The moon hung low and orange over the desert, casting long shadows across the dusty main street of Dust Rock. He'd planned to ride straight through, maybe stop at Murphy's for a drink to wash the trail dust from his throat. But the sound of breaking glass from the Harper place made him pull up short. Colt knew Jonas Harper by reputation, a mean drunk who'd inherited his daddy's freight business and promptly run it into the ground. The man spent more time at the bottom of a bottle than behind a desk, and everyone in Dust Rock knew his wife bore the brunt of his failures. It wasn't Colt's business, he told himself. A man didn't interfere between husband and wife. That was the code of the West, unwritten but understood. But then he heard the child cry, a thin, terrified wail that cut through the night like a blade, and something inside him snapped like a dry twig underfoot. Inside the house, Jonas had grabbed Evelyn by the hair, dragging her toward the bedroom. "Maybe if I beat some sense into you, you'll finally give me a son. Or maybe I should just find myself a real woman who can—" The front door exploded inward with such force it nearly came off its hinges. Jonas released Evelyn, spinning toward the intrusion with drunken fury. "Who the hell?" Colt Rawlins filled the doorway like an avenging angel dressed in trail dust and leather. At 6'2", with shoulders broadened by years of ranch work and eyes the color of a winter storm, he cut an imposing figure even without the Navy Colt holstered at his hip. "Evening, Jonas," Colt said, his voice calm as a mill pond but carrying an undercurrent of steel. "Heard some commotion. Thought I'd check if everything was all right." Jonas's face flushed deeper red. "Get out of my house, Rawlins! This ain't none of your concern!" "Normally, I'd agree with you." Colt's gaze shifted to Evelyn, taking in the blood on her face, the way she held herself like a broken bird, the little girl peeking out from behind her mother's skirts. But when a man starts making war on women and children, well, that changes things. "She's my wife," Jonas roared, stumbling forward. "I got rights." "You got responsibilities," Colt corrected, not moving an inch. "And from where I'm standing, you've been falling down on those something fierce." Jonas lunged, more out of drunken rage than any real fighting skill. Colt sidestepped easily, using the man's momentum to send him crashing into the kitchen table. Wood splintered, and Jonas went down hard, groaning. "Here's what's going to happen," Colt said, still in that eerily calm voice. "Mrs. Harper and her daughter are coming with me. You're going to sleep off whatever rot gut you've been swimming in, and in the morning, You're going to think real hard about what kind of man you want to be.
You can't take them.
Jonas wheezed from the floor. The law. The law's a day's ride away in Tucson. Colt reminded him. Out here, we make our own justice, and right now, justice looks like getting these ladies somewhere safe. Evelyn hadn't moved throughout the exchange, frozen by equal parts fear and disbelief. Men didn't stand up to Jonas Harper. Men didn't intervene in family matters. Yet here was Colt Rawlins, a man she knew only by sight and reputation, facing down her husband as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "Ma'am," Colt said gently, not taking his eyes off Jonas. "Why don't you gather whatever you and the little one might need for a few days? I've got a place about 5 miles out. It ain't much, but it's safe."
I can't,"
Evelyn whispered. Years of conditioning, of being told she was property, that she belonged to Jonas like his horse or his saddle, held her in place. "Yes, you can," Colt said firmly. "You take that first step, the rest get easier. I promise you that." Margaret tugged at her mother's skirts.
"Mama, please, I'm scared."
Those 3 words broke through Evelyn's paralysis like nothing else could. She'd endured Jonas's fists for herself, but her daughter, her precious girl who deserved so much better than this life of fear that was different.
Just a few things,"
she said, her voice stronger. She moved quickly, grabbing a carpet bag and stuffing it with clothes, her mother's Bible that Jonas had forbidden her to read, and the few coins she'd managed to hide away. Jonas tried to rise, but Colt planted a boot on his chest. "You stay right there until we're gone, and if you're thinking of following, remember that I was at Shiloh and Antietam. I've put down better men than you for lesser reasons." The threat wasn't delivered with heat or anger, just stated as simple fact, which made it all the more effective. Jonas Harper might be mean, but he wasn't stupid. He knew Colt Rawlins' reputation, a man who kept to himself, who'd lost his wife and infant son to cholera 5 years back, who'd carved out a modest ranch through sheer will and hard work. More importantly, he knew Colt was deadly accurate with both rifle and pistol. Evelyn emerged from the bedroom with Margaret in her arms and the carpet bag over her shoulder. She paused at the door, looking back at the man she'd married 6 years ago, when she'd been young and full of hope, when her father, the minister, had said Jonas Harper was a good match, a successful businessman who'd provide well for her. "Evelyn," Jonas called out, his voice shifting from anger to something almost pleading. "You're my wife. You took vows."
"I took vows to honor and obey,"
she said quietly.
"But you took vows too, Jonas, to love and cherish. When was the last time you did either?"
Colt removed his boot from Jonas's chest and backed toward the door. "We'll be going now. I suggest you use this time to think about your life choices. Maybe visit Reverend Mills. See if he can help you find your way back to being a decent man." The night air felt cool and clean after the stifling atmosphere inside the house. Colt helped Evelyn up onto his horse, then handed Margaret up to her before swinging up behind them. The little girl buried her face in her mother's chest, trembling like a leaf in a storm. "It's all right now, little one," Colt said softly. "Nobody's going to hurt you or your mama anymore. I give you my word on that." As they rode out of Dust Rock, Evelyn felt tears sliding down her cheeks, not tears of pain or fear, but something else entirely. For the first time in years, she felt something she'd almost forgotten existed. Hope. Behind them, Jonas Harper struggled to his feet, rage and humiliation warring in his whiskey-addled brain. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. A man didn't just take another man's wife, not in Dust Rock, not anywhere in the Arizona territory. There'd be a reckoning, and when it came, Colt Rawlins would learn what happened to men who interfered in family business. But for now, under the vast desert sky with its countless stars bearing witness, 3 souls rode toward an uncertain dawn, a broken woman beginning to believe she might be worth saving, a child who might grow up without fear, and a lonely man who'd forgotten what it felt like to protect something precious. The wind picked up. carrying the scent of creosote and possibility. Somewhere in the darkness, a coyote called to its pack, a lonesome sound that seemed to echo the ache in all their hearts. But even in that mournful cry, there was a promised survival despite the odds, life persisting in the harshest of lands. Evelyn tightened her arms around Margaret and leaned back slightly, feeling the solid presence of Colt Rollins behind her. She didn't know this man, didn't know what he wanted or why he'd risked Jonas's wrath to help them. But for now, for this moment, she chose to trust. After all, what did she have left to lose? The Rollins ranch appeared out of the darkness like a mirage, modest but well kept, with a main house, a barn, and a small corral. It wasn't much by territorial standards, but to Evelyn, it looked like sanctuary. "Welcome to the Triple R," Colt said as he helped them down. "It ain't fancy, but it's home." Dawn broke over the Triple R ranch like a promise kept, painting the desert in shades of gold and rose. Evelyn Harper woke to unfamiliar sounds, the gentle lowing of cattle, the nickering of horses, and most startling of all, the absence of fear that usually greeted her mornings. For a moment, she lay still on the narrow bed. Margaret curled against her side like a kitten, trying to remember where they were. The events of the previous night came flooding back, and with them, a fresh wave of uncertainty. She'd left Jonas, actually left him. The magnitude of what she'd done, what Colt Rollins had enabled her to do, struck her like a physical blow. "Mama," Margaret's voice was small, uncertain. "Are we safe here?" Evelyn smoothed her daughter's tangled hair. "I think so. Sweetheart, Mr. Rollins seems like a good man." "He didn't yell," Margaret observed with the simple wisdom of a child who'd learned to gauge safety by volume. "And he has kind eyes." Through the window, Evelyn could see Colt already at work, mending a section of fence near the barn. He moved with economical grace, every motion purposeful. She watched him for a moment, trying to reconcile this quiet, methodical man with the one who'd faced down Jonas without flinching. A soft knock at the door made her jump. "Mrs. Harper." Colt's voice was gentle. "I've got coffee on and some biscuits from yesterday. Nothing fancy, but it'll fill your bellies. Take your time coming out." His footsteps retreated, and Evelyn heard the front door open and close. Even now, he was giving her space, not presuming or pushing. It was so foreign to her experience that she hardly knew how to respond. They dressed quickly in the clothes they'd brought, and Evelyn tried to make them both presentable. Her face in the small mirror showed the evidence of Jonas's rage, a split lip, bruising along her jaw, but she'd worn worse and still gone to Sunday service with her head high. The main room of the house was simple but clean, with handmade furniture and a stone fireplace. What caught Evelyn's eye immediately were the books, a full shelf of them, more than she'd seen outside of her father's study. Her fingers itched to touch their spines, to open them and lose herself in their pages. "You can read them if you like," Colt said from the kitchen doorway, making her jump. "Sorry, didn't mean to startle you. Just wanted you to know anything in this house is yours to use while you're here. Jonas didn't allow—" She stopped, hating how weak she sounded. "Jonas isn't here," Colt said firmly. "His rules don't apply under my roof. Now, how do you take your coffee?" Over breakfast, eaten at the rough wooden table, Evelyn studied their host. In daylight, she could see the lines etched by sun and sorrow around his eyes, the careful way he moved, as if he'd learned not to make sudden gestures. He'd set out a jar of honey for Margaret, who delighted in drizzling it over her biscuit. "Mr. Rollins," Evelyn began, then stopped. "What did you say to a man who'd upended your entire world? Why did you help us?" He was quiet for a long moment, staring into his coffee cup. "My Sarah used to say that the measure of a man wasn't in how he treated his equals, but how he treated those who couldn't fight back. Reckon I failed that measure plenty of times. But last night," he shrugged. "Last night, I couldn't ride by. Your wife. Cholera took her and our boy 5 years back. Henry would have been about Margaret's age now. The words were delivered matter-of-factly, but Evelyn heard the grief underneath. I'm sorry, she said softly. We all carry our sorrows, Colt replied. Question is what we do with them. Now, I need to ask you something, and I need you to think hard about your answer. What's your plan? Evelyn's hands tightened around her cup. She'd been so focused on escape that she hadn't thought beyond it. I don't know. I have a cousin in San Francisco, but Jonas controls all the money. I could maybe find work, but who'd hire a woman with a child and Jonas? He won't just let this go. No, Colt agreed. He won't, which is why I'm proposing something that might sound strange. Stay here for a spell, not as anything improper, he added quickly. Seeing her eyes widen. I need help around the ranch cooking, mending, keeping the books. I can't pay much, but you'd have room and board and safety. Jonas won't dare come onto my land without cause. But people will talk, Evelyn said. A woman staying with a man who isn't her husband. Let them talk, Colt said. The folks in Dust Rock have been flapping their gums about me since Sarah died. One more story won't hurt. Besides, I'll bed down in the barn. You and Margaret can have the house. The barn. Evelyn was horrified. We couldn't put you out of your own home. Ma'am, I've slept in worse places than a barn full of sweet hay. During the war, mud and blood were my mattress more nights than I care to remember. This'll be like luxury. Margaret, who'd been quietly listening, piped up, Can I see the horses? Colt's face transformed with his smile. Well now, I reckon that can be arranged. Got a mare named Buttercup who's gentle as a lamb. But first, your mama and I need to finish talking. Over the next hour, they worked out the arrangements. Evelyn would cook, clean, and help with the ranch accounts. She'd learned numbers from her minister father before Jonas had forbidden such unwomanly pursuits. In exchange, she and Margaret would have shelter, protection, and a small wage. One more thing, Colt said as they shook hands to seal the deal. While you're here, you're under my protection. That means if Jonas or anyone else comes calling with trouble, they go through me. Are we clear on that? The fierce protectiveness in his voice made Evelyn's throat tight. When was the last time anyone had stood between her and harm? Yes, she whispered. Clear. That first week at the Triple R passed in a blur of adjustments. Evelyn threw herself into the work, finding unexpected satisfaction in creating order from chaos. The ranch house hadn't seen a woman's touch in 5 years, and while Colt had kept it clean, there were countless small tasks that had been neglected. She discovered that Colt woke before dawn every day, slipping out to tend the animals before she and Margaret stirred. By the time they emerged, he'd have coffee ready and would be back outside, maintaining that careful distance he'd established from the start. He took his meals with them, but retired to the barn as soon as the sun set, leaving them the house. Margaret blossomed like a desert flower after rain, without the constant threat of her father's temper. She became chatty and curious, following Colt around as he worked, peppering him with questions he answered with infinite patience. Hey, Mr. Colt, Evelyn heard her daughter say one afternoon. Why don't you have any little boys or girls? She froze, dish rag in hand, waiting for his response. I had a little boy once, Colt said gently, but he got sick and had to go live with the angels, with my grandpapa. I reckon so. Bet they're up there right now, making sure all the clouds are white and fluffy for us to look at. Margaret considered this. That's a big job. Good thing they have each other. That's right, little one. Good thing indeed. Evelyn had to turn away, pretending to be absorbed in scrubbing the stove, so they wouldn't see her tears. 3 days into their stay, she found Colt teaching Margaret to make a kite from paper and string. They were out by the corral, Colt's large hands gently guiding Margaret's small ones as they tied the cross pieces. "The trick is to make it light but strong," he was explaining. "Like a lot of things in life, too heavy and it won't fly. Too light and the first wind will tear it apart." "Like Mama?" Margaret asked innocently. "She's strong, but sometimes she looks like she might blow away." Colt's eyes found Evelyn's across the yard. "Your Mama's stronger than she knows. Sometimes people just need reminding of that." That evening, as had become their custom, Colt played his harmonica on the porch while Margaret danced in the dying light. Evelyn sat on the steps, her father's Bible in her lap. She'd been reading it again, finding comfort in the familiar words. "Strength and honor are her clothing," she read softly, "and she shall rejoice in time to come." "Proverbs," Colt said, lowering the harmonica. "Your father must have been a wise man to teach you scripture." "He was," Evelyn agreed. "He believed education was God's gift to all, not just men. Jonas disagreed." "Jonas is a fool," Colt said bluntly. "Pardon my language." No pardon needed for the truth. They sat in comfortable silence, watching Margaret chase fireflies. The desert evening was cooling, bringing the scent of sage and creosote. Somewhere in the distance, a pack of coyotes began their evening song. "They sound lonely," Evelyn observed. "They're calling to their family," Colt corrected. "Letting them know where they are, that they're safe. It's not loneliness, it's connection." She looked at him then, really looked at him. This man who'd lost everything but still found beauty in the world, who'd opened his home to strangers, who slept in a barn so she could feel safe. "Thank you," she said softly, "for everything." "No thanks needed. We're just three souls helping each other through. Nothing more natural than that." But even as he said it, Evelyn sensed something shifting between them. Not desire, not yet, but recognition. Two damaged people seeing themselves reflected in each other's eyes and not looking away. The peace was shattered the next morning when Samuel Potts, who ran the general store, arrived with supplies and news. "Thought you should know," he told Colt, eyeing Evelyn with barely concealed curiosity. "Jonas Harper's been making noise in town. Says you stole his wife, that he's going to see justice done. He's been gathering some of the rougher elements, promising whiskey and money to anyone who'll stand with him." Colt continued checking the supplies, seemingly unconcerned. "Jonas can make all the noise he wants. Man should have thought about justice when he was using his fists on a woman half his size." "I'm not arguing that," Samuel said. "Just thought you should know. Sheriff Pritchard's staying out of it for now, calling it a domestic matter. But if Jonas pushes—" "I know the law," Colt said quietly. "And I know my rights. This is my land, and these folks are under my protection. Anyone wants to dispute that, they know where to find me." After Samuel left, Evelyn found her hands shaking. "Maybe we should go," she said. "I don't want to bring trouble to your door." "The only trouble at my door is the kind that was already heading this way." Colt interrupted. "Jonas Harper's been spoiling for a fight with someone his own size for years. Has nothing to do with you and everything to do with him being a small man who needs to hurt others to feel big. But if there's violence, then it won't be us who starts it." His voice was firm. "But we'll finish it if we have to. Now, didn't you say something about teaching Margaret her letters today? Seems to me that's more important than worrying about what Jonas Harper might or might not do." That afternoon, Evelyn sat with Margaret at the kitchen table, using charcoal to form letters on precious paper. Colt had produced a primer from somewhere, dog-eared and worn, that had belonged to his son. "A is for apple," Margaret recited proudly. "B is for airbird." "What do you think?" As her daughter concentrated, tongue poking out in concentration, Evelyn felt that strange sensation again, hope. It was fragile as a soap bubble, but it was there. For the first time in years, she could imagine a future that wasn't shaped by fear. Outside, She could hear Colt working, the rhythmic sound of his hammer as he reinforced the barn doors. Preparing for trouble, she realized, without making a fuss about it, protecting them in his quiet, steady way. That night, she made his favorite meal venison stew with wild onions and herbs she'd found growing near the creek. When he thanked her, she saw surprise in his eyes at being remembered, at mattering enough to someone that they'd notice what he preferred. "It's the least I can do," she said. "You've already done more than you know," he replied. "This place, it's been just a house for 5 years. You've made it feel like a home again." The words hung between them, heavy with meaning neither was ready to acknowledge. But as Colt headed to the barn and Evelyn tucked Margaret into bed, she thought about cycles, how the desert bloomed after rain, how the sun rose after the darkest night, how sometimes you had to break something completely before you could rebuild it stronger. Perhaps that's what they were, 3 broken people slowly learning how to be whole again. Not by forgetting their pain, but by choosing to build something new despite it. And if Jonas wanted to challenge that, if the town wanted to gossip, well, let them come. She'd found sanctuary in the last place she'd expected, not just in a place, but in a person who asked nothing of her but what she was willing to give. And that, Evelyn thought as she watched the stars through the window, was its own kind of miracle. The evening air carried the sharp scent of coming rain, unusual for this time of year in the Arizona territory. Evelyn stood on the porch of the Triple R, watching storm clouds gather over the distant mountains, while Margaret played with a corn-husk doll Colt had fashioned for her. 2 weeks had passed since they'd arrived. 2 weeks of a peace she'd almost forgotten could exist. "Storm's coming," Colt observed, joining her on the porch. He kept his customary distance, close enough to talk but far enough to maintain propriety. "Might be a gully washer by the look of those clouds. My father used to say storms were God's way of washing the world clean," Evelyn replied, starting fresh. "Wise man." Colt's eyes tracked the lightning flickering on the horizon, though sometimes I wonder if some stains run too deep for even the Almighty to wash away. There was something in his voice, a heaviness that made Evelyn turn to study his profile. In the 2 weeks she'd been here, she'd learned to read his moods the way his jaw tightened when he was worried, how his hands stilled when he was thinking hard about something. "You're thinking about the war," she said. It wasn't a question. His smile was rueful, that transparent. "Am I? Sarah used to say I might as well write my thoughts on my forehead for all the good keeping them inside did me." "What was she like?" Evelyn asked softly. "Sarah." Colt was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "Like sunshine, that's what I remember most. She could walk into a room and everything just got brighter." She laughed at my terrible jokes, sang while she cooked, found joy in the smallest things. A wildflower, a pretty stone, a bird's nest. His voice roughened. She would have loved Margaret. Would have had her reading by now. Probably Sarah believed in education for everyone, like your father. "She sounds wonderful." She was too wonderful for this hard country. Maybe. When the sickness came, he stopped, shook his head. "I was out working the cattle. By the time I got back, she was burning with fever. 3 days later, she was gone. Henry followed her within hours, like he couldn't bear to be separated from his mama." Evelyn's heart ached for him. She knew that kind of loss, though different. Her father had died of a heart attack 2 years after her marriage, and she'd been forbidden to attend the funeral. Jonas had said it was too far to travel, but she'd known the real reason he hadn't wanted her talking to anyone who might help her. "I'm sorry," she said, knowing how inadequate the words were. "We all carry our ghosts," Colt said. "Question is whether we let them drive us or whether we take the reins ourselves." A giggle from Margaret drew their attention. She was making the corn-husk doll dance across the porch boards, humming a tune Evelyn recognized as one Colt had played on his harmonica. "She's healing," Colt observed. "Children are resilient that way, given half a chance and some kindness. They bounced back like spring grass after a drought.
What about adults?
Evelyn asked.
Do we bounce back?
He looked at her then. Really looked at her. I'm starting to think maybe we do. Just takes us longer to believe it's possible. The first fat raindrops began to fall, and Margaret squealed with delight, holding out her hands to catch them. It had been so long since rain that even Evelyn felt the urge to dance in it. Go ahead, Colt said, reading her expression. It's just water. Won't hurt nothing. But it's not proper. Proper flew out the window the night you climbed on my horse, he pointed out with a slight smile. Might as well enjoy the improper while you can. Before she could lose her nerve, Evelyn stepped off the porch into the rain. It was cool and clean, washing away the ever-present dust. Margaret immediately joined her, and they spun together, laughing as the rain soaked through their clothes. Come on, Mr. Colt, Margaret called. Dance with us. He shook his head, but Evelyn could see him fighting a smile. Someone needs to stay dry to get the fire going after. They danced until the rain became a downpour, then rushed inside, dripping and breathless. Colt had towels ready and was stoking the fire. The simple domesticity of the moment, him tending the fire while she dried Margaret's hair, struck Evelyn with unexpected force. Tell us a story, Mr. Colt, Margaret requested as she settled by the fire wrapped in a blanket. About when you were little. Well now, Colt said, settling into his chair. Did I ever tell you about the time I tried to ride my papa's bull? As he spun the tale involving a young colt, a mean-tempered bull, and a spectacular flight into a pig wallow, Evelyn found herself watching him more than listening. The way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, how he used his hands to illustrate the story, the gentle way he answered Margaret's countless interruptions with questions. This was what Jonas had never understood. She realized that strength wasn't about domination or control. Real strength was Colt sleeping in a barn to make them feel safe, was the careful distance he maintained despite the obvious loneliness in his eyes, was the way he'd taken them in without asking for anything in return. That night, after Margaret was asleep, Evelyn found herself restless. The rain had stopped, leaving the air clean and cool. She grabbed her shawl and stepped onto the porch, not surprised to find Colt there, smoking his pipe. Couldn't sleep either, he asked. Too much thinking. She settled onto the other chair, maintaining that careful distance they'd established. I've been remembering things. About Jonas. About how it wasn't always bad. Colt waited, not pushing. He was charming when we courted, she continued. Brought me flowers, praised my father's sermons, talked about the family we'd have. The first year wasn't terrible. It was only after I lost the first baby that things changed. He said it was my fault, that I'd done something wrong. Each loss after that, 3 in total before Margaret made him angrier. Wasn't your fault, Colt said firmly. These things happen. Sarah lost 2 before Henry came along. It's nobody's fault. I know that here. Evelyn touched her head. But knowing it here, she placed her hand over her heart. That's harder. Jonas is a fool and a coward, Colt said, blaming you for something beyond anyone's control, using his fists instead of offering comfort. A real man would have grieved with you, not added to your pain. They sat in comfortable silence, watching moths dance around the lantern. Evelyn found herself studying Colt's hands where they rested on his knees, scarred from work, gentle despite their strength, hands that had built this sanctuary, that had fashioned toys for Margaret, that had never once been raised in anger toward them. Can I ask you something? She said. Always. Why haven't you remarried? It's been 5 years. Surely there have been women interested. She paused, suddenly embarrassed by what she'd been about to say. I'm what? There was gentle teasing in his voice now. You're a good man, she finished, though that wasn't quite what she'd meant. Handsome, kind, steady. All those words hovered unspoken. There have been a few who've made their interest known, he admitted. Widow Morrison brings me pies regular-like, and Judge Pearson's daughter made it clear she'd be amenable to courting, but I wasn't ready. Felt like betraying Sarah's memory somehow, and none of them. He paused. None of them needed me. They wanted a husband, sure, but they didn't need someone to stand between them and the world's hardness. Didn't need what I had to offer.
And we do, Evelyn said softly.
You do, he agreed. But more than that, you deserve it. You and that little girl deserve every bit of kindness this hard world can offer. If I can provide even a small portion of that, well, it gives meaning to my days. The next morning brought trouble in the form of 3 riders approaching the ranch. Evelyn recognized Jonas's horse immediately, and her heart began to pound. Beside him rode Garrett Lynch, a hired gun who did dirty work for whoever paid him, and Thomas Burke, one of Jonas's drinking companions. Colt stepped out of the barn, rifle in hand but not raised. That's far enough, gentlemen. State your business. You know damn well why we're here. Rollins. Jonas called out. I've come for my wife. I don't see your wife. Colt replied calmly. I see a woman who sought sanctuary from a brute who forgot his marriage vows. She belongs to me. Jonas's face was red with fury and likely whiskey. Despite the early hour, the law says a lot of things. Colt interrupted, including that a man who beats his wife can be brought before a judge. You willing to test that? Jonas! Lynch shifted in his saddle, hand moving toward his gun. Colt's rifle swung toward him in a movement so smooth it seemed casual. I wouldn't. Lynch, you're fast, but not that fast. And even if you got me, you'd still have to explain to the sheriff why you shot a man on his own property. There are 3 of us, Burke pointed out, though he looked nervous. True enough, Colt agreed. And you might take me down, but I guarantee at least 2 of you won't ride away. Question is, which 2 you boys willing to die for Jonas Harper's wounded pride? Evelyn watched from the window. Margaret clutched against her chest. She should go out, she thought, end this before blood was shed. But her legs wouldn't move, frozen by years of conditioning. Then Margaret pulled away, and before Evelyn could stop her, ran out onto the porch. You leave Mr. Colt alone, she shouted at her father. He's nice. He doesn't hurt people. Jonas's face darkened further. Get back inside. Girl, this is men's business. Don't you dare speak to her that way, Evelyn said, finding her courage as she followed her daughter onto the porch. She's showing more bravery than you ever have. Jonas Harper. Evelyn, get back inside. Jonas ordered. No. The word came out stronger than she'd expected. I'm done taking orders from you, done being your property. I'm staying here, where Margaret and I are safe. You're my wife. I was your wife, Evelyn corrected. Until you forgot what that meant, until you decided your fists spoke louder than your vows. Jonas made to dismount, but Colt's rifle coming up stopped him. You stay on that horse. Harper, you've got 2 choices here. Ride away now and accept that Evelyn's made her decision, or push this and see how it ends. But I promise you, if you force me to defend this household, you won't like the outcome. This isn't over, Jonas snarled. I'll go to the sheriff, to the judge. You'll do what you need to do, Colt said, and we'll be ready. But for now, you'll turn those horses around and ride out, unless you're eager to test whether I've lost my aim since Antietam. Lynch was the first to turn his horse. He was a hired gun, not a fool, and he could read the situation. Without him, Jonas lost his nerve, with a string of curses that made Evelyn cover Margaret's ears. He yanked his horse around. You'll regret this, Evelyn, he shouted as he rode away. You'll come crawling back when you realize what you've thrown away. They watched until the riders were just dust on the horizon. Only then did Colt lower his rifle, and Evelyn saw his hands were steady as stone. You all right? he asked, turning to them. Margaret threw herself at his legs, hugging tight.
I was scared they'd hurt you.
He dropped to one knee, setting the rifle aside to hug her properly. Takes more than 3 bullies to hurt old Colt. Little one, but you were very brave, standing up like that. Brave as any soldier I ever knew. Over Margaret's head, his eyes met Evelyn's.
You too.
Saying no to him like that took courage.
I was terrified,
she admitted. Courage isn't about not being scared, he said, standing but keeping one hand on Margaret's shoulder. It's about doing what's right despite the fear. You did that today. That evening, as they went through their familiar routine dinner, Margaret's lessons, Colt's harmonica on the porch. Evelyn felt something fundamental had shifted. She'd stood up to Jonas, claimed her freedom with her own voice. The fear was still there, lurking like a coyote at the edge of firelight, but it no longer controlled her. I've been thinking, Colt said as Margaret practiced writing her name. Might be time to teach you both to shoot. Evelyn looked up from the shirt she was mending. Shoot. This is hard country. Jonas might come back, might bring more men next time. You should know how to defend yourselves if something happens to me. The thought of something happening to him sent a spike of fear through her that had nothing to do with her own safety. When had this quiet man become so essential to their peace of mind? All right, she agreed. When do we start? Tomorrow, if the weather holds. Margaret's too young for a rifle, but she can learn gun safety. And you, he smiled slightly. I have a feeling you might be a natural. As the evening wore on and Margaret began to yawn, Evelyn realized that for the first time in years, she was looking forward to tomorrow, not dreading it, not just enduring until it passed, but actually anticipating what it might bring. Time for bed. Little rabbit, she told Margaret. Can Mr. Colt tuck me in too? Margaret asked hopefully. Evelyn glanced at Colt, who looked surprised but pleased. If your mama doesn't mind. I don't mind. So they tucked Margaret in together, taking turns with the blankets and listening to her prayers, which now included, God bless Mr. Colt and Buttercup and all the nice animals. In her litany, it was painfully domestic, achingly like what a real family might do, and Evelyn had to blink back tears. Later, as Colt prepared to head to the barn, Evelyn caught his sleeve. Thank you, for today, for standing up to them. Always, he said simply, for as long as you need it. She wanted to say more, wanted to tell him how his quiet strength was slowly filling all the broken places Jonas had left in her soul. But the words wouldn't come. Not yet. Instead, she squeezed his arm gently and let go. As she watched him walk to the barn, Evelyn thought about courage and choices, about the family you're born to and the one you choose. She thought about Margaret's laughter returning, about books on shelves and stories by firelight, about a man who slept in a barn to keep them safe and never asked for anything in return. Tomorrow she would learn to shoot. Tomorrow she would take another step toward becoming the woman she'd forgotten she could be. And maybe, just maybe, she'd find the words to tell Colt Rollins that he wasn't the only one providing sanctuary. They were all saving each other, one day at a time, under the vast Arizona sky. The sickness came with the October wind, sweeping through dust rock like wildfire through dry grass. It started with the Hendersons' youngest, then spread to the schoolhouse, and within a week, half the town was down with fever. Evelyn first noticed something was wrong when Margaret didn't want her breakfast, pushing away the flapjacks she usually devoured.
My head hurts, Mama,
Margaret whispered, her usually bright eyes dulled with discomfort. Evelyn felt her daughter's forehead and her heart sank. Burning hot, the fever had found them even here, in their sanctuary at the Triple R. Colt, she called, trying to keep the panic from her voice. He appeared in the doorway within seconds, took one look at Margaret, and his face set in grim lines. The sickness.
I think so.
Without hesitation, he crossed to Margaret, lifting her gently. Let's get you to bed, little one. You're going to be just fine. But as the day wore on, Margaret's fever climbed higher. She tossed and turned, whimpering in her sleep, calling out for people who weren't there. Evelyn bathed her with cool water, tried to get her to drink, but nothing seemed to help. I should ride to town, fetch Doc Morrison, Colt said as evening approached.
He's probably overwhelmed with patients,
Evelyn said, not taking her eyes off Margaret.
Besides, I don't want you to leave.
The admission slipped out before she could stop it. Colt moved closer, placing a steady hand on her shoulder. Then I won't. We'll manage this together. Through that long night, they worked as a team. Colt remembered remedies his grandmother had taught him: willow bark tea for the fever, cool compresses scented with peppermint. He sang soft songs in a language Evelyn didn't recognize, Cherokee lullabies from his childhood, while she held Margaret's hand and prayed.
Tell me about your grandmother,
Evelyn said during one of Margaret's quieter moments, needing distraction from her fear.
She was Cherokee, full blood,
Colt said, wringing out another cloth.
Married my grandfather against everyone's wishes. Taught me about plants, healing, how to read the sky.
Said I had the hands of a healer, though I proved her wrong plenty during the war.
You didn't prove her wrong,
Evelyn said firmly.
You're healing us.
He looked at her in the lamplight, something deep and unspoken passing between them.
Maybe we're healing each other.
On the second night, Margaret's fever broke briefly. She opened clear eyes and asked for water, which she kept down. Evelyn nearly wept with relief, but by dawn, the fever was back, higher than before.
Why won't it stop?
Evelyn's voice cracked.
I can't lose her. Colt, I can't. She's all I have.
That's not true, he said quietly. And you're not going to lose her. This little girl is a fighter, just like her mama. By the third day, Evelyn herself was swaying with exhaustion. She'd barely slept, barely eaten, existing on coffee and determination. When she nearly dropped the water basin, Colt gently but firmly moved her aside. You need to rest.
I can't leave her.
You're no good to her if you collapse. Sleep for an hour. I'll watch her. Too tired to argue. Evelyn curled up on the floor beside Margaret's bed, her hand still touching her daughter's. She dozed fitfully, waking to the sound of Colt's voice. He was telling Margaret a story, his voice low and soothing. And the little bird was very sick. So sick all the other birds thought she wouldn't make it through the winter, but there was an old eagle who refused to give up on her.
He brought her the sweetest berries, the clearest water, and sang to her every day.
Evelyn kept her eyes closed, listening to the tenderness in his voice. This man who'd lost his own child was pouring all that stored-up love into saving hers. On the fourth night, the crisis came. Margaret's breathing became labored, her skin flushed and dry. Evelyn was beside herself, pacing the small room while Colt worked to cool the child's fever.
Please.
Evelyn found herself praying aloud.
Please don't take her. Take me instead if you must, but not her. She's innocent. She's good. She deserves to grow up, to be happy, to be free.
Evelyn! Colt's voice cut through her spiral. Look at me. She turned to face him, tears streaming down her face. She's going to make it, he said with such certainty she almost believed him.
Do you know why? Because she's got you for a mother.
Because she's learned to be strong from watching you. Because we're not going to let her go. He pulled her into his arms then, propriety be damned, and she clung to him like a lifeline. She could feel his heart beating steady and sure against her chest, could smell the leather and sage scent of him, could draw strength from his unwavering presence. When Sarah and Henry were sick, he said into her hair, I bargained with God, promised everything I had, everything I was, if he'd spare them. When he didn't, I thought it was punishment, thought I'd done something unforgivable. Took me years to understand that sometimes terrible things happen to good people.
And it's not punishment, it's just life. But that doesn't mean we stop fighting. Evelyn pulled back to look at him. What made you understand? You, he said simply. You and Margaret. If I hadn't lost them, I wouldn't have been here when you needed help. Doesn't make their loss right or fair, but maybe some good can come from the worst pain. They stayed like that, holding each other beside Margaret's bed, until a small voice interrupted. Mama, I'm thirsty. Evelyn spun around to find Margaret's eyes open, clear and focused for the first time in days. Her forehead, when Evelyn touched it, was cool. Oh, my darling girl, Evelyn sobbed, gathering Margaret into her arms. You're all right. You're going to be all right. Did I miss my letters? Margaret asked weakly. Mister, Colt was going to teach me Q today. Colt laughed, the sound rough with emotion. We'll make up for lost time, little one. Promise. The recovery was slow but steady. Margaret remained weak for days, but her appetite returned, and with it, her curiosity. Evelyn hovered constantly until Colt gently pointed out that she was going to worry herself sick. She needs normalcy, he advised. Children heal better when life goes on around them as usual. So they resumed their routines, modified for Margaret's strength. Lessons at the kitchen table became lessons in bed, with Margaret propped on pillows. Colt's evening harmonica moved inside, and he taught her simple tunes she could whistle along to. One evening, about a week after the fever broke, Evelyn found herself alone with Colt on the porch for the first time since the sickness. Margaret was asleep, genuinely asleep rather than fevered unconsciousness, and the relief of it made Evelyn feel light as air. I never thanked you properly, she said, for everything you did. No thanks needed. I told you before. No, she interrupted. Let me say this. When Jonas was my husband, when things were bad, I used to pray someone would help us. Night after night, I prayed, and night after night, nothing changed. I started to think God had abandoned us, that we weren't worth saving. She turned to face him fully. Then you appeared, like an answer to prayers I'd stopped believing in. You didn't just save us that night, Colt. You keep saving us every day. With your kindness, your protection, your... She paused, gathering courage. Your love, because that's what it is. Isn't it what I see when you look at Margaret? When you teach her letters and make her dolls and sing her to sleep? You love her. I do, Colt admitted quietly. Couldn't help myself. She's easy to love. And me? The question hung between them like morning mist. Do you love me too? He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, I've been trying not to. Told myself you needed a friend, a protector, not another man making demands on your heart. Told myself it was too soon after Jonas, too soon after Sarah. Told myself a lot of things. But yes, Evelyn, I love you. Have for a while now. Though I've no right to. Why no right? Because you deserve to be courted proper, to have choices, to know your own mind without gratitude or desperation clouding it. You've been free of Jonas for barely 2 months. That's no time at all to know what you really want. Evelyn stood, moving to where he sat. Do you know what I thought when Margaret was at her sickest? Not about Jonas, not about the past. I thought about you teaching her to ride Buttercup, about the 3 of us at Sunday dinner, like a real family, about waking up in a house where you didn't have to sleep in the barn anymore. About... She stopped, blushing. About what? His voice was rough. About kissing you, she admitted. About what it would feel like to be held by someone who wanted to give instead of take. About building a life with you, if you'd have us. Evelyn, I know it's too soon by society's standards. I know people will talk. But Colt, I spent 6 years dying inside a marriage that looked proper from the outside. I won't waste more time worrying about what others think, not when I know who I want. He stood slowly, reaching out to cup her face with one work-roughened hand. You're sure? I've never been more sure of anything. When he kissed her, it was nothing like the demanding, possessive kisses she'd known before. This was gentle, questioning, giving her every chance to pull away. Instead, she leaned in, her hands fisting in his shirt, anchoring herself to this moment, this man, this new beginning. When they broke apart, both breathing unsteadily, Colt rested his forehead against hers. I should court you proper. Flowers and Sunday drives and... We're not conventional people, Evelyn interrupted. You housed a runaway wife. I fell in love with a man while still married to another. Margaret adopted you before I did. Why start being conventional now? He laughed, the sound rumbling through his chest. When you put it like that. But I want to do right by you, Evelyn. You've had enough of men who didn't. Then do right by me by being yourself, she said. By being the man who sleeps in barns and tells stories and saves broken birds. That's all I need. What about Jonas? He won't give you a divorce easy. Then we'll face that when it comes. Together. She took his hand, marveling at how right it felt in hers. I'm tired of living in fear of what might happen. Margaret almost died, but she didn't. We could spend forever worrying about Jonas and the law and society, or we could just live. Together, Colt repeated, like he was testing the word. If you'll have us. Have you, Evelyn Harper? I'd face down 100 Jonas Harpers for the chance to wake up knowing you and Margaret were safe under my roof, but not as my responsibility or my good deed, as my family, my loves, mine to cherish, not to own. Fresh tears spilled down Evelyn's cheeks, but these were tears of joy, of relief, of coming home after a long and terrible journey. Then we're yours, she whispered, and you're ours. From this day forward, whatever comes. Inside the house, Margaret coughed in her sleep, and both of them turned toward the sound, ready to respond if needed. But she settled quickly, and they relaxed. We should go in, Evelyn said, in case she wakes. In a moment. Colt pulled her close again, and they stood together on the porch, looking out at the star-filled sky. I want to remember this. The night everything changed. The night we stopped being 3 broken people and started being a family. We were already a family, Evelyn corrected softly. Tonight we just admitted it. Later, as she checked on Margaret one more time before bed, Evelyn found her daughter awake, watching her with knowing eyes. Are you going to marry Mr. Colt? Margaret asked. Would you like that? Yes, Margaret said simply. He makes you smile real smiles, not the pretend ones. And he loves us. Yes, Evelyn agreed, smoothing her daughter's hair. He does. Good. Margaret yawned. Can he be my papa now? If you want him to be. I do. Papa Colt. I like that. As Margaret drifted back to sleep, Evelyn stood by the window, looking out at the barn where Colt was preparing his bed. Not for much longer, she thought. Soon he'd be here in the house, where he belonged. They had obstacles ahead, Jonas, the law, society's judgment, but they also had each other, and after surviving fever and fear, gun-wielding husbands and near loss, she knew they could face anything. The desert wind sang through the eaves, and somewhere in the darkness, a mockingbird began its night song, 100 borrowed melodies woven into something new and beautiful, like their family. Evelyn thought, pieced together from loss and hope, sorrow and joy, creating something stronger than any of them could be alone. Tomorrow would bring its challenges, but tonight, in a small ranch house beneath the vast Arizona sky, 3 hearts beat with the same rhythm of love, hope, and home. The November heat was unseasonable, even for Arizona. Colt had been working since dawn, repairing the fence line where the wild mustangs had broken through again. His shirt clung to him, soaked through with sweat, and dust painted patterns on his skin where it mixed with the moisture.
The sun beat down mercilessly, turning the desert into a furnace. Evelyn watched him from the porch where she'd been hanging laundry. 2 weeks had passed since their confession on this same porch. 2 weeks of careful courtship despite their unconventional situation. Colt had moved back into the house, taking the small room off the kitchen, but they'd maintained proper boundaries. Still, the awareness between them hummed like telegraph wires in the wind. "Mama, can I take Papa Colt some water?" Margaret asked. Fully recovered now and eager to help. She'd taken to calling him Papa Colt with the ease of childhood adaptation, and every time she did, Evelyn saw him fight back emotion.
"That's thoughtful. Sweetheart, be careful not to spill."
She watched Margaret navigate the distance to where Colt worked, the precious water sloshing only a little. He saw her coming and immediately stopped, dropping to one knee to accept the gift at her level. The tenderness in the gesture made Evelyn's heart clench. When Margaret skipped back to the house, Colt remained kneeling, drinking deeply. A movement caught his shoulder, barbed wire snapping back, and he winced, his hand going to where fresh blood seeped through his shirt. Without thinking, Evelyn hurried to him. "You're hurt." "Just a scratch," he said, but she could see it was deeper than that, the wire having caught him just below his collarbone. "Come to the house, that needs cleaning."
"I've got more fence to—"
"The fence can wait." Her tone brooked no argument, and he followed her to the house with something like amusement in his eyes. In the kitchen, she had him sit while she gathered what she needed: clean water, whiskey for disinfecting, soft cloths. "Take off your shirt." He hesitated, despite their declared feelings. Despite the kiss that had changed everything, they'd been careful about maintaining some distance. Now she was asking him to cross that invisible line.
"Evelyn, I need to see the wound properly,"
she said, trying to sound practical despite the heat in her cheeks.
"Please."
Slowly, he unbuttoned his shirt and shrugged it off. Evelyn's breath caught. She'd known he was strong. Ranch work demanded it, but seeing the reality of him, the sun-browned skin marked with old scars from the war, the lean muscle earned through honest labor, made her pulse quicken. The cut was deeper than she'd thought, running 4 inches across his chest. She cleaned it carefully, aware of his breathing, of the way his muscles tensed when the whiskey hit the wound.
"I'm sorry," she murmured. "I know it stings."
"Had worse." His voice was rough, though usually not with such gentle tending. She worked in silence for a moment, then asked, "These other scars from the war?" "Most of them. That one's from Antietam." He indicated a puckered mark on his ribs. "That's from a horse with opinions about being broke. And this—" He touched a thin line on his shoulder. "Sarah threw a plate at me once. Only time she ever lost her temper with me. I'd stayed out all night helping birth a calf and forgot to send word. She thought something had happened to me.
She must have been frightened."
"Terrified, then furious when I walked in come morning, covered in blood and birth fluid, grinning like a fool about the healthy calf." His smile was distant, fond.
"She cried and cursed and threw that plate all at once. Then she kissed me and made me promise never to scare her like that again."
Evelyn's hand stilled on his skin.
"You miss her?"
"I do," he said simply. "But missing her doesn't mean—" He caught her hand, stilling its motion. "It doesn't mean I love you any less. The heart's not a water barrel that empties and fills. It's more like the desert after rain. The more love it holds, the more it can contain." The poetry of his words, unexpected from such a practical man, made her eyes burn with unshed tears. She looked at him, this man who'd saved them, who loved them, who spoke of hearts and deserts with equal understanding. "Colt," she whispered, and something in her voice made his expression change. Intensity replacing gentleness. The space between them disappeared. She wasn't sure who moved first, only that suddenly she was in his arms, her hands against his bare chest, feeling his heartbeat race to match hers. The kiss was nothing like their first. This was fire and need, and 2 months of careful distance dissolving like sugar in rain. When his lips found her throat, she gasped, her fingers tangling in his hair. The world narrowed to sensation, the heat of his skin under her palms, the roughness of his jaw against her neck, the way he said her name like a prayer. In her fevered state, driven by a desire she'd never felt with Jonas, never thought she could feel at all, she did something that shocked them both. She pressed her lips to his chest, tasting the salt of his labor, the essence of this man who worked so hard for them. She licked the sweat off his chest. Her mind registered distantly, as if watching someone else entirely. Colt went absolutely still, a tremor running through his entire body. "Evelyn," he groaned, his voice strained. "Darlin, pure torture." His hands framed her face, tilting it up so their eyes met. What she saw there, desire, yes, but also reverence, love, and careful control made her knees weak. "Don't stop," she whispered. "Please, I need to feel alive, to feel wanted, not owned, to know what it's like when it's right." He kissed her again, deeper this time, walking her backward until she was pressed against the kitchen wall. "You are wanted," he said against her lips. "Wanted, treasured, beloved. But Evelyn, we should..." "Should what wait be proper?" She pulled back to look at him. "I've been proper my whole life. Where did it get me 6 years with a man who saw me as property? 3 lost babies and a broken spirit. I'm tired of proper. Colt, I want real. I want this. I want you." He studied her face, reading the truth there. "You're sure?" "I've never been more sure of anything." What followed was unlike anything in her experience. Where Jonas had taken, Colt gave. Where there had been roughness and demand, now there was gentleness and question. He lifted her as if she weighed nothing, carrying her to his small room, laying her on the narrow bed with infinite care. "Like spun glass," he murmured, tracing her face with wondering fingers. "Too beautiful to be real." "I'm real," she assured him, catching his hand and pressing it to her heart. "Flesh and blood, and years of waiting for this, for you." He loved her slowly, carefully, as if they had all the time in the world instead of stolen moments while Margaret napped. He whispered endearments against her skin, how beautiful she was, how strong, how precious. When she cried, overwhelmed by the tenderness, he kissed away her tears. "Am I hurting you?" "No," she gasped, pulling him closer. "No. You're healing me, every touch, every word, healing all the broken places." Afterward, they lay entwined on the narrow bed, her head on his chest, listening to his heartbeat slow. Through the window, she could see the desert shimmering in the afternoon heat, but here in their sanctuary, she felt only peace. "I meant to court you proper," Colt said, his voice rumbling under her ear. "Flowers and Sunday calls and all the proper things." "This is better than proper," Evelyn replied, tracing the scar from Antietam with gentle fingers. "This is true." "Losing himself in her warmth," he murmured, echoing her thoughts from earlier. "That's what you do to me, Evelyn. Make me lose myself and find myself all at once. Never felt anything like it." "Not even with Sarah?" The question slipped out before she could stop it. He was quiet for a moment. "What I had with Sarah was young love, sweet and bright and untested. We never faced real hardship together, never had to fight for each other. What you and I have, it's been forged in fire, tested by pain and loss and choosing each other anyway. It's different, not better or worse, just different." She lifted her head to look at him. "Do you think she'd approve?" "I know she would. Sarah believed in love, in second chances, in grabbing happiness wherever you could find it. She'd probably scold me for waiting this long." A small sound from outside made them both freeze Margaret, calling for her mother. Reality crashed back. They dressed quickly.
Evelyn's hands shaking as she fixed her hair, tried to smooth the wrinkles from her dress.
Go,
Colt said, buttoning his shirt over the bandage she'd applied. I'll wait a few minutes. Come in the back way. But before she could leave, he caught her hand. No regrets.
None,
She said firmly.
never, not about this.
She found Margaret in the kitchen, rubbing sleepy eyes. Where were you?
Mama.
Just helping Papa Colt with his hurt, Evelyn said, the half-truth sitting strangely on her tongue. Is he better now? Yes, sweetheart, much better. When Colt came in a few minutes later, Margaret ran to him as always, and he swung her up into his arms, over her head. His eyes met Evelyn's, and the look their possession and promise and barely banked fire made her shiver despite the heat. That evening followed their usual patterned dinner. Lessons. Colt's harmonica, but everything felt charged with new meaning. Every accidental brush of hands as they cleared the table. Every shared glance over Margaret's head carried weight. After Margaret was asleep, they sat on the porch in their customary chairs, but the careful distance they'd maintained was gone. Colt reached over, taking her hand, and they sat in comfortable silence watching the stars emerge. We should talk about the future, he said eventually. Jonas won't give you a divorce easy. Could take years if he agrees at all. I want to marry you. Evelyn, want to make it official in the eyes of God and law. But until then, we're already married in every way that matters. She finished. I've spoken vows in my heart. The rest is just paperwork. People will talk. Let them. They talk anyway. At least now they'll have something true to gossip about. He brought her hand to his lips, kissing each finger. You're sure you can handle the scandal? It's one thing to leave a husband, another to live in sin, as they'll call it. Is it a sin to love, to build a family, to choose happiness over misery? She shook her head. I can't believe God would condemn us for that. And if society does, well, I've learned society's rules aren't always right. My practical philosopher, he said with fond amusement. When did you get so wise? Somewhere between Jonas's fists and your arms, she replied. Amazing how clearly you can see when you're finally safe enough to look. A coyote howled in the distance, answered by another, then another. The sound that had once seemed lonely now sounded like what Colt had taught her family calling to family across the darkness. I love you, she said, the words still feeling new and precious on her tongue. I love the way you are with Margaret, the way you work this land, the way you see beauty in hard things. I love your hands and your heart and the way you make me feel like I'm worth protecting. You are worth protecting, he said fiercely. Worth fighting for, worth everything. Then we face whatever comes, she said. Jonas, the law, the gossips, none of it matters as long as we're together. Together, he agreed, and the words sounded like a vow. Later, getting ready for bed. Evelyn caught sight of herself in the mirror. She looked different, not just the faint beard burn on her neck or the thoroughly kissed fullness of her lips. Something in her eyes had changed. The haunted look was fading, replaced by something that might have been joy. She thought about the afternoon, about crossing lines that couldn't be uncrossed, about the shocking freedom of desire chosen rather than demanded, about Colt's reverent hands and whispered endearments, and the way he'd made her feel cherished rather than conquered. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Jonas would hear eventually that she'd taken up with Colt as more than landlord and tenant. There would be consequences, legal and social. But tonight, with her daughter safe in bed and her chosen man keeping watch, Evelyn Harper allowed herself to feel something she'd thought lost forever. She was home, not just in a place, but in a life, in a love, in a future she was building with her own hands. And no force on earth, not Jonas, not society, not all the proper rules she'd once followed would take that from her again. The desert winds sang through the windows, carrying the scent of sage and possibility. And in a small ranch house where 3 hearts beat as one, love grew stronger with each passing moment,
defiant and beautiful as a desert rose blooming against all odds. The courthouse in Dustrock was a modest adobe building that served multiple purposes: town hall, jail, and occasional church when the circuit preacher came through. On this December morning, it was packed to the rafters with townspeople eager to witness the spectacle of Jonas Harper versus his runaway wife. Evelyn sat between Colt and Margaret, her hands folded in her lap to hide their trembling. She wore her best dress, a simple blue calico that Colt had bought for her in Tucson, and had pinned her hair in a severe bun. She wanted to look respectable, proper, everything a good wife should be. The irony wasn't lost on her. Jonas sat across the aisle with his lawyer, Mr. Pemberton from Tucson, a man known for taking unsavory cases if the money was right. Jonas looked rougher than she remembered. His drinking had clearly worsened in the 3 months since she'd left. But his eyes, when they found hers, still held that familiar rage. Judge William Thornton, circuit judge for the territory, was a stern man in his 60s with a reputation for fairness. He called the proceedings to order with sharp raps of his gavel. "We're here to address the petition of Jonas Harper regarding the return of his lawful wife, Evelyn Harper, to his household." The judge began. "Mr. Pemberton, you may present your case." Pemberton stood, his oily voice filling the room. "Your Honor, the matter is simple. Mrs. Harper is the lawful wedded wife of my client. She abandoned her marital home without cause, taking with her their child. She has been living openly with another man." He gestured dismissively at Colt. "In a state of adultery, the law is clear. A wife belongs with her husband. We demand her immediate return." Murmurs ran through the crowd. Some nodded agreement the law was the law. Others, mostly women, looked troubled. "Is Mrs. Harper represented by counsel?" Judge Thornton asked. Evelyn stood on shaking legs. "No, Your Honor, but I'd like to speak for myself, if I may." "Highly irregular," Pemberton protested. "Perhaps," the judge said dryly. "But this is Dustrock, not Boston. Mrs. Harper, you may speak." Evelyn walked to the front of the room, feeling every eye upon her. She could do this. She had to do this. For Margaret. For herself. For the future they were building. "Your Honor," she began, her voice quiet but clear. "I did leave my husband's home, but not without cause." "Lies," Jonas erupted. "She's a faithless—" "Hey, Mr. Harper, you will remain silent or be removed," the judge warned. Evelyn continued. "For 6 years, I endured my husband's fists. For 6 years, I made excuses. He was tired. He'd been drinking. Business was bad. For 6 years, I believed it was my fault, that if I could just be a better wife, if I could give him the son he wanted instead of daughters who died and the one who lived." Her voice caught, but she pressed on. Then maybe he would stop. The room had gone completely silent. Even the children, brought by curious mothers, seemed to sense the gravity of the moment. "The night I left," Evelyn said, "Jonas beat me because our daughter Margaret exists, because she's a girl and not the son he demanded. He was drunk, angrier than I'd ever seen him. I thought he might kill us both." "These are merely accusations," Pemberton interrupted smoothly. "Where's your proof? Any witnesses to these alleged beatings?" Evelyn's heart sank. This was the trap Jonas had always been careful to hurt her where it wouldn't show, or to wait until bruises faded before they went to town. Then a voice spoke from the crowd. "I seen it." Everyone turned. Mrs. Abigail Morrison, the doctor's wife, stood up. She was a pillar of the community, above reproach. "I seen the bruises when she came to help with the church bazaar." Mrs. Morrison continued. "Finger marks on her arms, split lips she tried to hide. Once, marks around her throat like someone tried to—" She paused, collecting herself. "Well, like someone grabbed her throat." "I seen it too." Another woman stood Mrs.
Chen from the laundry. She bring clothes to wash, try to get blood out, always say she clumsy. But I know what fist marks look like on fabric. One by one, women throughout the room stood. The banker's wife, the blacksmith's daughter, the widow who ran the boarding house. Each with a story bruises seen, tears witnessed, fear observed. "She teach my girl letters," Maria Gonzalez said in broken English. "Even when her own eye black, she come teach. Good woman, kind woman, not deserve hurt." Evelyn felt tears streaming down her face. All this time, she'd thought she'd hidden it so well. But these women had seen, had known, had watched her suffer in silence because that was what women did until now. "This is ridiculous," Jonas exploded, jumping to his feet. "They're all lying. She's turned them against me." "Mr. Harper, sit down," Judge Thornton commanded. "No, she's my wife, my property. The law says many things." A new voice interrupted. Reverend Mills, the traveling preacher, stood. "It also says a husband should love his wife as Christ loved the church. Tell me, Mr. Harper, is beating a woman, loving her, is threatening a child, cherishing her?" "You don't understand." Jonas snarled. "She couldn't even give me sons, 3 babies dead, and then 1 girl. Useless. A man needs sons." A gasp ran through the room. In his anger, Jonas had just confirmed everything Evelyn had said. Judge Thornton's face was granite. "Mr. Harper, are you saying you beat your wife because she gave birth to daughters instead of sons?" Jonas realized his mistake. That's not... "She made me do it if she'd been a proper wife." "A proper wife," Evelyn said quietly, finding her voice again. "I tried so hard to be proper, to be silent, to endure, to believe that marriage meant accepting whatever treatment my husband gave. But then I watched him look at our daughter with the same rage he showed me, and I knew that staying meant teaching her this was normal, teaching her that women exist to be hurt, to be blamed, to be less than human." She turned to face the packed courtroom. "Yes, I left my husband. Yes, I sought shelter with Mr. Rollins, who has shown me and my daughter nothing but kindness and respect. If that makes me a fallen woman in your eyes, so be it. But I would rather be fallen and alive than proper and dead." "And what of your marriage vows?" Pemberton pressed. "To honor and obey." "What of his vows?" Evelyn countered. "To love and cherish, which vow-breaking came first, Mr. Pemberton." Colt stood then, drawing all eyes. "Your Honor, if I may." Judge Thornton nodded. "I've been silent out of respect for these proceedings," Colt said, his voice carrying easily through the room. "But I can't stand by while this man claims ownership of a woman like she's cattle. Evelyn Harper came to my home seeking safety. I gave it freely, as any decent man would. If that makes me guilty of something, then I'll accept whatever judgment you give. But I'll not stand by and watch her be sent back to a man who sees her as property to be beaten when it doesn't perform to his satisfaction." "You stole her!" Jonas shouted. "She was mine." "She was never yours," Colt said calmly. "You had her body through law and force, but you never had her heart, her mind, her spirit. Those can't be owned. Harper, they can only be earned. And you lost any right to them the first time you raised your hand to her." "Pretty words," Pemberton sneered. "But the law?" "The law is meant to protect." Judge Thornton interrupted, speaking for the first time in many minutes. "All citizens, including wives, including daughters." He looked directly at Jonas. "Mr. Harper, I've heard enough. While it's true that divorce is difficult to obtain in this territory, and while the law does generally support a husband's rights, it does not support abuse. It does not support violence. And it certainly does not support a man who admits to beating his wife because she bore him a living daughter instead of a son." He turned to Evelyn. "Mrs. Harper, I cannot grant you a divorce that's beyond my jurisdiction.
but I can and will issue a legal separation. You are free to live where you choose, with whom you choose. Mr. Harper is forbidden from approaching you or your daughter without your express permission. Any violation of this order will result in his immediate arrest."
"You can't do this," Jonas raged. "She's my wife."
"And she will remain your wife in name only until such time as a divorce can be obtained," the judge said sternly. "But she is not your property, Mr. Harper. No human being is property. We fought a war to establish that principle, and I'll not see it violated in my courtroom." The gavel came down with finality. The courtroom erupted. Women embraced each other, many crying. Men looked uncomfortable, some angry, others thoughtful. Jonas had to be restrained by the sheriff as he tried to lunge at Evelyn.
"This isn't over,"
he screamed as he was dragged out.
"You hear me? This isn't over."
But for Evelyn, surrounded by women who had broken their silence to support her, held safe in Colt's strong arms while Margaret clung to her skirts, something was very much over. The fear, the silence, the belief that she deserved pain. Outside the courthouse, the December sun shone bright and warm. Women approached her one by one, pressing her hands, whispering support. Some shared their own stories in hushed tones, bruises hidden, tears shed in private. Fear swallowed like bitter medicine. "What you did in there." "Mrs.?" Morrison said quietly. "It matters. My own daughter. She's in a situation, well, seeing you stand up like that, maybe it will give her courage. We should start something." "Mrs." Chen suggested. "A group for women to meet, share, support each other. Not to gossip, but to know we're not alone." And there, on the courthouse steps, something new was born. Not just Evelyn's freedom, but a quiet revolution. Women who had suffered in silence finding their voices, finding each other, finding strength in solidarity. Colt drove them home in the wagon, Margaret chattering excitedly about all the people and drama. But Evelyn was quiet, processing what had happened. "You all right?" Colt asked softly. "I don't know," she admitted. "I thought I'd feel victorious, relieved. But mostly I feel sad. For all those women who stood up. For all the ones who didn't. For the years we've all lost to fear. Change is hard," he said. "Even good change. But what you did today, Evelyn, you didn't just free yourself. You lit a candle others can follow." That night, after Margaret was asleep, they sat together on the porch as had become their custom. But this time, Evelyn curled into Colt's side. No longer concerned about propriety, the judge had acknowledged their arrangement obliquely. The town knew. There was no point in pretense. "Jonas won't give up," she said quietly. "You hurt him. He'll find another way to hurt us." "Maybe," Colt agreed. "But he'll have to go through me to do it. And now he knows the town won't just look away. Those women who spoke up, they changed things, made it harder for men like Jonas to hide behind closed doors." "I never expected them to speak," Evelyn admitted. "All those years, I thought I was invisible, but they saw." "Women see more than men credit them for," Colt said. "Sarah used to say women had to develop sharp eyes and closed mouths to survive. Maybe now they can keep the sharp eyes but open their mouths a bit more." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge. The December night was cool, and Evelyn pressed closer to Colt's warmth. "The judge said I'm free to live with whom I choose," she said eventually. "I choose you, now and always." "And I choose you," he replied, pressing a kiss to her hair. "Wife of my heart, if not yet by law." "Someday," she said, "when Jonas finally agrees to divorce or drinks himself to death, whichever comes first, we'll stand before Reverend Mills and make it official. I'd marry you tonight if I could," Colt said, "but I can wait. We've got time now." Time to build our life without looking over our shoulders. Time to raise Margaret in peace. Time to be a family. We're already a family, Evelyn corrected, echoing her words from weeks before. Today just made it harder for anyone to tear us apart. Inside the house, Margaret coughed in her sleep, and both of them tensed, ready to check on her. But she settled, and they relaxed. The vigilance born of her illness would take time to fade. She was so brave today, Evelyn said, sitting there while people talked about her father, about me. She shouldn't have had to hear all that. She needed to hear it. Colt disagreed gently. To know that what happened in that house wasn't normal or right, to hear other people say it out loud. Children know more than we think, but they need adults to confirm what they know. When did you become so wise about children? When one particular child wrapped me around her little finger, he said with a smile. Margaret's taught me as much as I've taught her, maybe more. As if summoned by their conversation, Margaret appeared in the doorway, rubbing sleepy eyes. Mama, Papa, Colt, I had a dream. They brought her out to the porch, wrapping her in a blanket between them. Want to tell us about it? Evelyn asked. I dreamed about the courthouse, Margaret said. But in my dream, all the ladies were wearing pants like Papa Colt. And they were judges too. And nobody was scared. She yawned. Is that silly? Not silly at all, Evelyn said, exchanging glances with Colt over her head. Maybe someday it will be real. I hope so, Margaret murmured, already drifting back to sleep. Ladies should get to be judges too. They carried her back to bed together, tucking her in with practiced ease, standing in her doorway, watching her sleep peacefully. Evelyn felt the full weight of what they'd accomplished today. Not just her own freedom, but the possibility of something better for Margaret. A world where women's voices mattered, where marriage meant partnership, not ownership, where little girls could dream of being judges. It wouldn't happen overnight. There would be setbacks, resistance, probably violence from those who preferred the old ways. But something had shifted today in that packed courtroom. A seed had been planted. Come to bed, Colt said softly, taking her hand. Tomorrow will bring its own challenges. Tonight, let's just be grateful. And Evelyn was grateful for Colt's steady presence, for Margaret's resilience, for women who'd found their courage, for a judge who'd chosen justice over convention, for the chance to build something new from the ashes of what had been. As she lay in Colt's arms that night, listening to the familiar sounds of the ranch, Evelyn thought about transformation, how a beaten woman had become a voice for change, how a bitter widower had become a loving father, how a frightened child had become a dreamer of new possibilities. The desert had taught her that the hardest ground could bloom with unexpected life when the rains finally came. Today had been their rain washing away the old, nourishing the new, promising growth in unlikely places. Whatever Jonas did next, whatever the town gossip said, whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, not as victim and protector, but as equals, as partners, as family. And that, Evelyn thought as sleep finally claimed her, was its own kind of justice. The letter from Sheriff Pritchard arrived on a February morning when the desert was painted in wildflowers, an unexpected blessing after winter rains. Colt read it twice before handing it to Evelyn, his face carefully neutral. Jonas is gone, she read aloud, then looked up in shock. Dead? Not dead, gone. Lit out for Mexico, apparently. He and some others robbed a Wells Fargo shipment last week. Guard was killed. They're wanted men now. Evelyn sank into a chair, the letter trembling in her hands. 3 months since the trial. 3 months of waiting for Jonas to make good on his threats. Now this. Mexico, she repeated. He really left. Man like Jonas, publicly humiliated, legally barred from what he sees as his property, he was always going to turn to something desperate. Appears he chose outlawry over acceptance. Margaret, practicing her letters at the table, looked up.
Does this mean he won't come back?
Colt knelt beside her chair.
It means he can't come back. Little one, not without facing a noose. Men who kill during robberies don't get second chances.
Good, Margaret said simply, returning to her work. The casual acceptance in her voice spoke volumes about what Jonas had put them through. Over the following weeks, the news rippled through Dust Rock like rings in water. Jonas Harper, respectable businessman turned wife-beater turned outlaw. Some said Evelyn had driven him to it. Others, increasingly more, said he'd always been heading that direction, she'd just been convenient to blame for his failures. The women's group that had spontaneously formed after the trial had become a regular Thursday afternoon gathering. They met at different houses, ostensibly for quilting or canning, but really to talk, share, and support each other. Evelyn had become an unofficial leader, though she tried to deflect that role.
You gave us courage, Mrs.
Morrison insisted one afternoon as they worked on a wedding quilt for the blacksmith's daughter. The least we can do is stand together now. The conversation turned, as it often did, to practical matters. How to hide money from drinking husbands, how to teach daughters to read despite fathers who thought education unwomanly, how to help each other when things got bad.
My Henry's not a bad man,
Mrs. Patterson said quietly, working her needle through the fabric.
But when he drinks, he becomes someone else. Last week.
She paused, then pushed on.
Last week, I told him if he raised his hand to me again, I'd take the children and go to my sister in California.
What did he say? Someone asked.
He laughed at first. Then he saw I'd already packed a bag. Haven't seen him take a drink since.
She managed a small smile.
Maybe he won't change permanent-like, but at least he knows I won't just take it anymore.
These small victories accumulated like rain in a barrel. Women standing straighter, speaking louder, demanding better. Not all succeeded, some men doubled down on control. Some women were too beaten down to fight, but something had shifted in the social fabric of Dust Rock. At the R life had settled into peaceful rhythms. The school Evelyn had started in their barn now had 12 regular students. Parents who'd initially been scandalized by the idea of their children learning from a fallen woman had gradually been won over by the results. Their children were reading, writing, doing sums. Margaret had become a helper, proud to teach younger children their letters. One evening in March, as Evelyn was preparing supper, Colt came in with an odd expression. "Company coming," he said. "Buggy about a mile out." Evelyn tensed. Unexpected visitors rarely brought good news. But when the buggy arrived, it carried Reverend Mills and, surprisingly, Judge Thornton. "Afternoon, folks," the Reverend said, climbing down. "Hope we're not interrupting." "Not at all," Colt replied, though his hand rested casually near his rifle. "What brings you out here?" Judge Thornton cleared his throat. "Official business, I'm afraid. May we come in?" They gathered around the kitchen table. Margaret sent to play in her room despite her protests. The judge pulled out a document. "Mr. Harper left more than robbery charges behind," he began. "Apparently, he owed significant debts, the bank's calling them in, which means they're claiming his assets, including," he paused uncomfortably, "including any claim to his wife's property or earnings."
"I don't have property,"
Evelyn said, confused. "But you have earnings," the judge pointed out. "From teaching. The bank's lawyer argues those belong to Jonas's estate, since you're still legally married." "That's preposterous," Colt exploded. "It's the law," Judge Thornton said grimly. "Unless—" "Unless what?" Reverend Mills spoke up. "Unless she's no longer married to Jonas Harper." Evelyn's heart leaped.
"Divorce, but I thought—"
"Not divorce," the judge interrupted. "That still requires Jonas's presence or proof of abandonment for 7 years. However," he pulled out another paper, "there's another way.
if Jonas Harper is declared legally dead. But he's not dead, Evelyn said. He's in Mexico.
Is he? Judge Thornton asked carefully. A man who robs Wells Fargo, kills a guard, flees to Mexico, lots of dangers in Mexico. Bandits, disease, other outlaws who don't take kindly to competition. Who's to say Jonas Harper survived the journey? Understanding dawned. You want to declare him dead without a body. I want to free you from a marriage that exists only on paper. The judge corrected. The law allows for declaration of death in absentia when someone disappears under dangerous circumstances and cannot be located for a reasonable period. 3 months qualifies, especially given the circumstances. It's not entirely honest, Reverend Mills admitted. But neither is a law that keeps a woman chained to a man who abandoned her after trying to destroy her. Sometimes the letter of the law must bend to serve its spirit justice. Evelyn looked at Colt, who nodded slightly.
What do I need to do?
The process was surprisingly simple. Sign an affidavit that Jonas had disappeared, that she had no knowledge of his whereabouts, that she believed him dead given the dangerous circumstances. All technically true, if one squinted at it right. The declaration will be official in 30 days, Judge Thornton said, standing to leave. After that, you'll be a widow in the eyes of the law, free to make whatever arrangements you see fit. After they left, Evelyn stood in the yard, watching their buggy disappear into the distance. Colt joined her, sliding an arm around her waist. How do you feel? He asked. I don't know, she admitted. Relieved guilty for being relieved. It's strange to be glad someone's gone, even someone who hurt us. You're not glad he's gone, Colt corrected gently. You're glad you're free. There's a difference. That night, after Margaret was asleep, they sat by the fire planning their future with a new sense of possibility. We could marry, Colt said, as if the idea had just occurred to him. If you wanted, once the declaration's official. Is that a proposal, Mr. Rawlins? Evelyn teased. He dropped to one knee right there by the fireplace, taking her hand. Evelyn Harper, you've already made me the happiest man in the territory just by being here. Would you make it official, be my wife-in-law as you already are in my heart? Yes, she said simply, pulling him up for a kiss.
1,000 times yes.
They were married 6 weeks later, on a perfect April day when the desert was still green from winter rains. The ceremony was small, just them, Margaret, and a handful of close friends. But the women's group had secretly organized a reception, and half of Dust Rock showed up to celebrate.
Never thought I'd see the day.
Mrs. Chen said, embracing Evelyn. When you walked into my laundry with those bloodied clothes, I thought you'd end up another sad story. Instead, look at you teaching our children, standing proud, marrying for love. Reverend Mills performed the ceremony under the big cottonwood behind the house. Margaret stood as flower girl, beaming with pride in her new dress. When he asked who gave this woman, Margaret piped up, I do, causing gentle laughter through the crowd. The vows were simple, traditional, but they carried weight for two people who'd learned the hard way what those words truly meant. To love, honor, and cherish, in sickness and health, for better or worse. They'd already lived through worse, now it was time for better. You may kiss your bride, Reverend Mills announced. And Colt did so thoroughly, to the delight of the crowd, and Margaret's giggled, Papa Colt. The reception was a wonder. Tables groaned under the weight of food contributed by the community. The women's group had made a quilt, each square representing a different member, all bound together in a pattern of interconnected stars. It's called Sister's Choice, Mrs. Morrison explained. Seemed fitting. As the sun set, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold, Evelyn found herself watching the celebration with wonder. Children ran between tables. Women laughed freely. Men discussed crops and cattle. Normal, peaceful life, but undergirded by something deeper. A community that had learned to speak hard truths, to stand together, to choose justice over ease.
Happy, Colt asked, joining her on the porch. Beyond words, she replied. I never imagined all of this, not just us, but them. She gestured to the gathering. How one desperate flight in the night could lead to so much change.
You led to the change, he corrected, by being brave enough to speak truth, by teaching their children, by showing them a different way was possible. Old Sam, the fiddler, struck up a tune, and couples began to dance in the yard. Colt held out his hand. Mrs. Rollins, may I have this dance? She took his hand, letting him spin her into the makeshift dance floor. Around them, other couples joined in, some married 50 years, some newly courting, all equal in this moment of joy. Margaret darted between the dancers, finally attaching herself to Colt's leg. He lifted her up, and they danced as a 3-person unit, laughing as they tried not to trip over each other.
Best day ever,
Margaret declared.
Until tomorrow, Evelyn said, kissing her daughter's cheek. Tomorrow might be even better.
As the stars came out and lanterns were lit, Evelyn reflected on the journey that had brought them here, from a night of terror to a day of joy, from silence to voice, from isolation to community, from fear to love. The desert had taught her about resilience, about beauty blooming in unlikely places, about the patience of stones and the persistence of water. But the people around her, Colt, Margaret, the women who'd found their courage, the men who'd learned to listen, they'd taught her about the power of choosing differently, of breaking cycles, of building new from the ruins of old. Jonas was gone, vanished into whatever fate awaited men who chose violence over growth. His shadow no longer fell across their door. In his absence, life had flourished like the desert after rain, unexpected, vibrant, and beautiful.
I love you, Mrs. Rollins,
Colt whispered in her ear as they swayed to the music.
And I love you, Mr. Rollins,
she replied.
Thank you for saving us.
We saved each other, he corrected. That's what family does.
Family? The word settled around them like a blessing. Not the family she'd been born to or married into the first time, but the one she'd chosen and built and fought for, the one that had chosen her in return. As the party wound down and guests began to leave, each woman from the Thursday group squeezed Evelyn's hand, a silent acknowledgement of shared struggle and triumph. Their group had grown from desperation, but it would continue from strength. They had work still to do, stories still to share, children still to teach, futures still to build. But tonight was for celebrating, for dancing under stars, for Margaret's laughter and Colt's strong arms and the promise of all the tomorrows stretching ahead like an open road. The R Ranch stood solid against the night sky, no longer a refuge, but a home. In the barn that had become a schoolhouse, slates waited for tomorrow's lessons. In the house, a marriage bed waited for its first night of sanctioned love. In the yard where they danced, the desert wind scattered flower petals like blessings. And in the hearts of 3 people who'd found each other against all odds, love grew deeper with each passing moment, not the desperate love of those who have nothing else, but the steady love of those who choose each other again and again, in freedom and joy, until the end of their days. 5 years had passed since that April wedding day, and the R Ranch had transformed into something neither Colt nor Evelyn could have imagined. The simple barn school had grown into a proper schoolhouse, built by the community with lumber donated by the mill and labor given freely by fathers who wanted better for their children. On this May morning, Evelyn stood in the doorway of that schoolhouse, watching 23 children practice their recitations. Margaret, now 12 and tall for her age, helped the younger ones with their letters. She moved with quiet confidence, her father's steadiness combined with her mother's grace. Mrs. Rollins, little Tom Chen called out. Margaret says I wrote this word wrong,
but I think it's right. Evelyn moved to settle the dispute, hiding her smile at Margaret's earnest expression. Teaching had become her calling, but watching Margaret grow into a young woman of intelligence and compassion that was her greatest joy. The afternoon brought unexpected visitors. A wagon approached, loaded with furniture and belongings, carrying a young woman with a black eye and 2 small children. Evelyn's heart sank even as she straightened her shoulders. They'd seen this before.
Please,
the woman said, climbing down carefully. I heard you help women who need somewhere safe. Come inside. Evelyn said simply, Margaret, please run and fetch your father. The Triple R had become known throughout the territory as a place of refuge. Not officially, that would have brought too much trouble, but whispered woman to woman. A secret network of hope. They'd helped dozens over the years, some staying just long enough to heal, others finding new lives in California or Colorado, away from the men who'd hurt them. Colt appeared within minutes, took in the situation with a glance, and immediately began helping unload the wagon. No questions about the woman's bruises, no judgment about her leaving, just quiet, steady help. That evening, after the new family was settled in the small cabin they'd built for such situations, Colt and Evelyn sat on their beloved porch, watching the sunset paint the desert in shades of gold and crimson. Sarah Jenkins, Evelyn said, naming their guest. From Tucson, husband's a banker, respected man. No one believed her when she tried to tell them. They'll believe her here, Colt said firmly. And when she's ready to move on, we'll help with that too. A sound from inside made them both turn. Through the window, they could see Margaret reading to the Jenkins children, using different voices for each character, making them laugh despite the fear that still shadowed their eyes. She's going to be a teacher, Evelyn said softly. A better one than me. Different, maybe not better. Colt pulled her close. You've taught this whole community, not just letters and numbers, but courage. Look what's grown from that seed you planted. It was true. Dust Rock had changed profoundly in 5 years. The Women's Thursday group had evolved into an official civic improvement society, with voting rights and a voice in town decisions. They'd established a fund for widows and abandoned wives, pushed for a female doctor to visit monthly, even convinced the town council to appoint Mrs. Morrison as assistant to the sheriff, the first woman in such a position in the territory. Not everyone appreciated the changes. There'd been resistance, sometimes violent, but the tide had turned. Men who beat their wives found themselves shunned at the saloon. Young men courting learned that the women of Dust Rock expected partnership, not domination. It wasn't perfect change, never was, but it was progress. Letter came today. Colt mentioned. From that publisher in San Francisco. Evelyn's heart jumped. She'd been writing down the stories of the women they'd helped, changing names and details, but preserving the truth of their experiences. On a whim, encouraged by the Thursday group, she'd sent some to a publisher who specialized in social reform literature. And they want to publish it. Voices from the Desert True Tales of Women's Courage. He grinned. My wife, the author. Our stories, she corrected. I'm just the one writing them down. With the proceeds going to the refuge fund, he added. You're giving them voice and helping fund their futures. That's more than just writing. Evelyn, that's changing the world, one story at a time. Margaret emerged onto the porch, settling between them with the ease of a child secure in love. The Jenkins children are asleep. She reported, I told them about when we first came here, how scared I was, and how Papa Colt made everything safe. Was that okay? That was perfect, sweetheart, Evelyn assured her. They sat in comfortable silence, 3 hearts beating as one, watching stars emerge in the darkening sky. The desert evening was perfect cool breeze carrying the scent of sage, coyotes singing in the distance, the ranch peaceful around them. Tell me again about the white flower tree, Margaret requested, a ritual from childhood she hadn't quite outgrown. Colt smiled.
Which story, the one about the wedding?
All of them, Margaret said.
From the beginning.
So they told it together, Colt and Evelyn taking turns. How a desperate night had led to sanctuary. How kindness had grown into love. How a community had found its voice. How a schoolhouse had risen from a barn. How broken hearts had mended stronger than before. As they talked, the white-flowered tree in question, a desert willow Colt had planted the day after their wedding, rustled in the breeze. It had grown tall and strong, its roots deep in the desert soil, its branches reaching toward the stars. In spring, it bloomed with fragrant flowers that fell like snow, carpeting the ground with petals, and they lived happily ever after. Margaret concluded with satisfaction. Still living? Colt corrected gently. Story's not over yet. Good, Margaret said firmly.
I like our story.
Later that night, after Margaret was in bed and the ranch had settled into sleep, Evelyn and Colt made their final rounds, checking on the horses, ensuring the Jenkins family had everything they needed, securing the schoolhouse for tomorrow's lessons. Do you ever regret it? Evelyn asked as they walked hand in hand back to the house. Taking us in that night, your life was simpler before. Simpler, maybe, but empty. He stopped, turning to face her in the moonlight. You and Margaret didn't just fill my life. You gave it meaning again. Every woman we help, every child who learns to read, every family that finds safety here, that's Sarah and Henry's legacy too. Love spreading outward like ripples in water. Jonas would hate what Dustrock's become. Evelyn mused. Good thing he's not here to see it then. There'd been word, 2 years back, that Jonas had been killed in a gunfight in Mexico. No one mourned. His story had ended as violently as he'd lived, while theirs had bloomed into something beautiful. Inside the house, they prepared for bed with the comfortable rhythm of long partnership. 5 years of marriage had only deepened their love, transforming passion into something richer, a deep aquifer that sustained them through drought and plenty alike. The women want to put up a statue, Evelyn mentioned as she braided her hair, in the town square, to commemorate the courage of all women.
What did you tell them?
That statues are for the dead. We're still very much alive and fighting. She smiled. Maybe someday, when the work is done. Work like this is never done, Colt observed. Each generation has to choose again. But you've given them the tools, education, community, examples of different ways to be. A cry from outside interrupted them, not distress, but joy. Through the window, they could see lights in the desert, torches carried by riders, heading their way. Colt reached for his rifle from habit, but Evelyn stopped him. Look closer. It's the Thursday group. Indeed it was. 24 women on horseback, some who'd never ridden alone before this year, approaching the ranch with purpose. Mrs. Morrison led them, her gray hair silver in the moonlight. Evelyn, Colt, come out here. They emerged to find the yard full of women, all grinning, Mrs. Chen held up a telegram. From the territorial legislature. They've passed it. The bill we've been pushing? Married women can own property in their own names now, can keep their own earnings, can inherit without male oversight. The celebration that erupted woke the whole ranch. Margaret appeared, rubbing sleepy eyes, then shrieking with delight as she understood the news. Even the Jenkins children peered out shyly, drawn by the joy. It's just the beginning, Mrs. Morrison said, tears streaming down her face. But it's a start, and it wouldn't have happened without you, Evelyn, without that day in court when you stood up and said no more. It wouldn't have happened without all of us, Evelyn corrected, her own eyes wet. Without every woman who spoke up, who refused to be silent, who dared to imagine better. They celebrated there under the stars. Women who'd found their voices and used them to change laws. The desert willow shed petals like confetti, blessing their gathering. Stories were shared, plans were made, Futures were imagined that would have been impossible 5 years before. As dawn approached and the women prepared to ride back to town, Sarah Jenkins approached Evelyn.
Is it real?
She asked quietly.
Can things really change?
Stand here, Evelyn said, positioning the woman under the flowering tree.
Look around you.
5 years ago, I stood in this spot, bleeding and afraid, certain my life was over. Now look, a school, a refuge, laws changing, women riding free under the stars. Yes, things can change. They already have.
The morning sun crested the mountains, painting the desert in shades of rose and gold.
The white flowers of the desert willow glowed like stars in the new light, and a mockingbird began its morning symphony. Margaret stood between her parents, tall and strong and unafraid. Around them, the ranch stirred to life, horses nickering for breakfast, children's voices from the cabin, the school bell waiting to ring. What now? Colt asked, his arm around Evelyn's waist.
Now we keep going, she said simply. We teach, we shelter, we write stories, we change laws. We love each other and spread that love outward.
We tend this garden we've planted and watch it grow.
Together,
Margaret added, taking both their hands. Together, they agreed. The desert wind whispered through the flowers above them, carrying seeds to distant ground. Somewhere, those seeds would take root, growing into new trees, new shelter, new hope. The story that began with one desperate flight into darkness had become a light for others to follow, not an ending, but a beginning that renewed itself with each woman who found her voice, each child who learned to read, each heart that chose love over fear. Under the flowering tree at the Triple R Ranch, 3 people stood watching the sun rise on a world made better by their courage, their love, and their unshakable belief that even the harshest ground could bloom when tended with care. The desert had taught them about endurance. Life had taught them about loss. But together, they had learned the greatest lesson of all, that love, like water in the desert, always finds a way. Thank you so much for listening to this story of love, courage, and transformation in the Old West. I hope Evelyn and Colt's journey touched your heart as much as it touched mine while sharing it.
I'd love to know where you're listening from. Please share in the comments below so we can connect and discuss what this story meant to you.
If you enjoyed this tale, please subscribe to Wild West Night for more authentic stories of love and resilience from America's frontier. Hit that like button and, most importantly, click the hype button to help more people discover this story of hope and second chances. Until next time, partners, keep riding toward your own sunrise.